Hey, it's Saturday. Bang your head with busted pencils, fully leaded. Education talk, educated educators talking education. Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, Jacob, chairman of the boards, me, Dr. Tim Slecker. Loving being here on a Saturday. My two bros. Jacob, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Tim. I've been surprised by the amount of times that one of you or the other has needed me to fill in as the faux educator, but I've tried my best, and hopefully, people haven't noticed too steep a quality drop in recent episodes.
I would say there's been no quality drop. There's been a quality addition, Jacob, because you're giving us that perspective. And I got to imagine listeners are kind of like, wait a minute, those are the questions I wanted to ask those two dudes for the longest time. Thank goodness for Jacob being in the house. Because if it wasn't for Jacob, those two would just blather on forever and ever, thinking that they're always, I don't know, you name it. Johnny Lupinacci, how you doing Saturday?
Hey man, it's great. It's another week. It's beautiful. Been beautiful weather. We've been getting some rain out here in Eastern Washington, which I know people think about Washington and they think about rainy Seattle on the west side, but it's pretty dry over here on the east side of the state. And so it's always fun to have, consecutive days of some rain and getting things all watered. It's been nice. It's been a very nice transition, as I was mentioning this week in class and session from my regular grind of a school year, which is pretty it's a pretty intense one,
Hmm.
to just working locally with a group of teachers, and they're about to be teachers. It's a MIT 1 year program, so working
Yeah.
with them and kind of wrapping up the academic school year and
Right.
transitioning into the off season for us teachers, which is when we retool and we set our compass for what is it we want to learn and get ready for me August when we're back at it full time. So really enjoying that transition and been able to talk with a lot of teachers, which is how I like to
Yeah.
spend every May.
Yeah, you've been talking a lot to teachers, and I'm glad you have your compass because I typically try to either use my soapstone or a divining rod, because the accuracy of those types of things. But Johnny, you're finding out, we were talking about this during the break and over the last couple days, and in fact, you mentioned it in class in session that the conversations as that you've been having with you say these future teachers, these people, they're done, they're going to be a teacher, and their concerns. And it was interesting to hear what you were saying their concerns were, because anybody who's been listening to this show for the last, well, forever, right, is going, well, we know what teachers concerns are who are about to be teachers. It's blank 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 and blank. But that's kinda not really what's happening, and I mean, before we dig into this, Johnny, I mean, give us some insight. What are these future new teachers saying they're concerned about?
Well, some of them are future new teachers, Tim, but every starting in April every year and then all of May and then most of June, part of my I call it the off season. I think about everything in terms of sports. Like chairman of the board, Jacob has his Habs hat on, his Montreal Canadian loyalty. I love it. Original six team who are having a big off season this year. They made an unexpected playoff appearance. They're building, they're young, they're a phenomenal program, and they have deep history. And they utilize their off season to really hone in on what are the things they want to do to be even bigger and badder and better next year, next season. And that's kind of how I approach, my teaching, Tim, is, I'm a researcher in education and I'm a teacher educator and I'm also a teacher. And, we talked about it here on Busted Pencils before. What makes us educated educators? Well, before I got my PhD, even while I was working on my PhD, I was a teacher, right? And so it's my primary identity is like, hey, I'm a teacher. And one thing I know about my job, about teachers learning, teaching teachers, is that teachers learn the most. And
Mm.
hold on to your like, buckle up. This is going to be earth shattering. That's me using the sarcasm,
I
Tim.
know. Well, I'm gonna say you're about to say when they attend Tim and Johnny's classes
Well,
on
kind of true, but but I don't know about our classes, but certainly when they're listening to Busted Pencils, because every teacher out there, in fact, every listener is going to be like, well, duh. But, scientific consensus, researchers have shown us that one of the only things that we have statistical significance on. So we have like mathematical representation, which doesn't mean all the other stuff we do isn't important. But the only thing we have direct evidence on having an impact
Mhm.
on change in like how teachers teach their instruction, which ultimately leads then to student achievement. But the only proof we have that teachers are learning new things is that when they learn new things and try them in their classrooms, so they
Mhm.
move beyond just playing school, like being able to take a test or being able to write an essay or turn in a lesson plan or perform for their college teachers. They when they actually are making changes in how they teach, right? The only evidence we have of that happening is when there's been a significant amount of time, and I can get into the hours. It's actually over 100 plus hours of talking with other teachers
Mm.
about their teaching specifically related to students that they have. So when you hear teachers say, "Well, I learned the most when I finally got out of school and I was in my classroom,"
Right.
one of the things that they're saying is they were connected with actual learners
Mm.
and they were in conversation, hopefully through professional learning communities or just social gatherings. They're in conversation with other teachers. So when teachers talk with other teachers about their teaching, that is sort of, if we were to say, is there a silver bullet
Mm.
in how teachers learn? It's that. Need more conversation about teaching that teachers are having with other
Okay.
teachers. So obviously, yeah, Tim. So when you're listening to Busted Pencils, it's kind of like being in conversation with other teachers, which means it has most likely more of a chance of impacting change in education than hold on to my seat than my amazing 2 hour social studies history class. At best, I tell my students, and I say this, and I believe we do more, teacher educators out there. Like the same goes for like if you're a biology teacher in college or anything. Like the more your students are actively engaged in conversation with one another in a learner identity. So hey, I'm gonna be, a biologist, or hey, I'm gonna be, a nurse or something where they directly have an identity around that learning and they're actively engaged in conversation with one another. They're learning. That's the kind of stuff that's going to stay with them. The information that you share with them related to those conversations is going to stay with them as they go into their careers. So more dialogue, shouldn't be a shock. People are like, well, yeah, when I was a plumber, Tim, when did I learn the most about new things in plumbing? Was talking to other plumbers about what was working and what wasn't working and what do they do when X, Y, and Z happens. So that shouldn't be earth shattering for our listeners. But given that, Tim, comes back around to what you were asking me. So a good off season, a program like the Habs, like the Montreal Canadiens, that I'm calling the Habitants, that H in the middle of the C stands for that. They're identifying their coaching staff, their trainers, their players. They're kind of figuring out what are the gaps, what are the things they need to work on, and how are they going to work on those in the off season. So similar as, a member of a team of teacher educators and as an educational researcher, every April, May, and June, I'm talking with teachers, hundreds of
Mhm.
them. I'm asking them veteran teachers, new teachers, future teachers, parapros, people in schools, principals, talking to educators about, their teaching. What have they seen as the most important stuff they would like to talk to other teachers about? What are the things that they found really difficult this past year? What are the things they'd like to learn more about? What kind of inquiries do they have? What kind of things are they doing to make their teaching better? What are their interests? What are their aha moments and successes this past year? And Tim, uh, you know, by and large, for several close to a decade now,
Yeah, at least.
the primary thing that everybody says I want to learn more about, like
Right.
maybe the super duper veterans out there, but by and large, the most dominant topic that emerges from this is classroom management. They say, Johnny, man, oof, I could use some more support with classroom management. I'd like to learn more about this classroom management or retool my classroom management system or that's been by and large the number one topic that teachers are wanting to talk about with other teachers. But the past couple years, this has changed, so I have two new topics that have eclipsed
Okay.
that, Tim. So
Well,
I'm gonna bury those for a minute. We'll get to them, but
yeah,
I see you want to jump in, and I've
yeah,
been
yeah. I just
talking.
well, it's really for for the listener out there to hear what you had just said. Classroom management. First of all, what controlling the classroom. I hate to use that
Well,
word,
I mean,
but yeah,
you
you
mapping
know,
that onto it.
it's the behavior of the students. How to, and I remember this
Can be.
learning to become a teacher. How do we get in line to go to gym class? How do we sharpen our pencils? All those things, which really, really, really sound like trivial. It's like, wait, it's like no, because orchestrating that flow really has a distinct and really kind of a connection to how well teaching and learning can occur. And really, like you said, especially new teachers are always, in fact, I would say one of the things that we typically, Johnny, as methods professors, or at least me, and then you could back me up on this, is that I sometimes get kind of like, look, stop worrying about the darn management. You're going to figure that out. Listen to the stuff I'm trying to talk to you about, the importance of the content and all those things. But the reality is like, no, that's where they are. I understand where they're coming from. And as you said, Johnny, decade, it's more than a decade. I guess if we did a longitudinal kind of research survey of what's the number one concern, it has some type of sense of saying, man, I just wish I understood how to get things to work more smoothly so I could do much more engaging learning. But Johnny, you hinted maybe something's starting to shift. And I tell you
Oh
what, if
yeah,
you're out there and you're a teacher listening, going, I know what Johnny's going to say. Hey,
I bet they
stay
do.
stay tuned, because we're going to be back. Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. You love that music on a Saturday. Or if you're downloading anytime, Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, Jacob, chairman of the board, me, Dr. Tim Slecker. We are here. Man, we're putting it together, end of another school season. I know some teachers are out there going, I got a few more weeks. We know, but a lot of the future teachers who are, graduating this week, last week, next week, particularly, right? Johnny's spending a lot of time with them, getting a lot of their concerns and what it is they're talking about. And John, we spent the whole first segment saying, like, look, for eons, you could predict if you put 10, particularly future teachers in a room and say, what's your biggest concern for next year? 9 of them would have said, as you pointed out, some form of classroom management.
Yeah,
Okay.
some aspect. It's been forever, Tim, and you hit the nail on the head. I believe it's gone back even further than I'm about 10 years into this every April, May, June,
Well,
making sure I talk to all the teachers I can. Just fill my time with, interviewing teachers to learn about what are their top sort of concerns, what are their big successes for the year, what are the things that they felt they struggled with and could use support in or more, information about. And as long as I've been doing that, which
mhm.
you hinted at, it goes way back even
Well,
further.
I was gonna say I uncovered this text, a really old text, and there's some guy named Socrates, and he he
So
he
great.
was Socrate, and he was like, I can't get them to sit still and pay attention.
Well, I
And
mean, this does come up to an age old. It has, you know, like themes emerge for a reason. And it's not because, well, I'll tell you what, all these people becoming teachers just aren't good at managing kids. It's because all behavior is a form of communication. And how we've talked about it on here, Tim, schooling versus education, talking about ways that we might, as educators, emancipate education from schooling, get to the learning. But so much of schooling systemically is about controlling kids, and so much about being a kid is resisting being controlled, as it should be, especially when we start to talk about like middle school and high school and like preteen and adolescent behaviors. It is absolutely like on par for the mark for young people to be like, this is not what I want my body to be doing right now. So
Mhm.
the structure of schooling has worked against learning for ages. And so that's sort of part of the merging process. Also, you mentioned this, Tim, like most classroom management is presented in sort of the expectation that many teachers are faced with is controlling kids, which is a losing battle.
Right.
We can even be optimistic and say, in your classroom of 23 students, which we know teachers out there, you're probably chuckling because you're like, try more like 40.
Yeah.
There some states education, remember, is a state, right? So it's, it varies from state to state, and even within our states from district to district. But ideally, we have larger class sizes, and the whole idea of putting everybody in the room who were born around the same time in one space with like one adult, maybe that adult, especially when that adult's like maybe a new teacher, it's like 22 years old.
Right.
So like, hey, 22-year-old, you're in charge of these, 30 some, 12-year-olds all in one space, so the deck is stacked against the teachers. But you hit the nail on the head. Classroom management too often is been, framed in, sort of positioned as managing, controlling kids. And controlling kids is not the same thing as engaging them.
Right.
Like those two things work against one another. Great teachers out there are like, well, yeah, I know this. Of course, this is the thing. So, that let's put a pin in that for now. That's still
Yeah.
a
Hold
uh,
that.
like I'll say hot topic, but it is not the only by far front runner. In fact, it's been eclipsed. It's been passed
Yeah.
by two topics, Tim, that are almost dead even right now. If I'm just to count up how many teachers sort of said the top thing I'd like to spend more time on with other teachers talking about and learning about, two new topics. I wouldn't say they're new, but new front runners, Tim.
Mhm.
And this didn't surprise me, but it's also giving some validation, Tim, to the conversations we have here on Busted Pencils. Here are the two, and then let's dig into them a bit
Yeah.
because I bet like you and I can talk forever about each one. So not that classroom management per se, the systems we put to practice in our classroom to engage students as learners isn't important, but lately it's been eclipsed by two things. And I think all three of these things are related, but let's get to the two new front runners. The
Alright.
first, like slightly in first place, but I
Slightly.
mean, these two topics I'm about to drop are right up at the top with one another. The first, Tim, is the political climate and its
Mm.
impact on their classrooms. More specifically, how can I teach things I know kids want to and need to be learning about in this political climate? Whether it's
Mhm.
history or whether it's science, there's just a number of topics. Teachers feel that there's external political pressure, maybe even consequences for
Mhm.
teaching things. It ranged anywhere from, about gender, about, diversity, about diverse cultures, about history, like US history. Everything. They feel like the impact of the polarization of our culture politically
Mhm.
has become really like a heavy weight on them, a concern to them. How can I teach what I know is my best? It's almost like saying, medical professionals take a Hippocratic oath
Mhm.
to provide the best possible health care to everyone. And teachers, we similarly come into
Right.
teaching with a similar kind of oath, like do no harm and
Mhm.
teach the best available knowledge, the best available things to our children, whether that's, hey, we've learned so much. I'll use a pretty non-political example. As a science teacher, I learned about plate tectonics very differently than I would teach it now in high school because we've learned more from the scientific community
Hmm.
about the Earth's, plate systems and how they work and sort of their histories and what's going on there. So, like, things change as new information provides us with better scientific consensus to teach in the classroom. Though teachers feel like so many topics have been polarized in the
Hmm.
current politics, and it's not just Trump, right? We can get to that, but it's definitely, I think, escalated it to the
Hmm.
first and foremost concern that teachers have. So they're asking, by and large, I'll simplify it. How can I teach what I know to be the best knowledge, the things my students need to be citizens in our community, support our democracy in this current political time? They're concerned about parents being overly upset about school board, overreach, about all these kinds of things.
Is that all part of number one? Because let's get to two before we get
Yeah,
into
that's
the
the
next
number
section.
one, and let me drop two, and then we'll probably have to head into a break,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back and we'll dig into these. The second, Tim, oof, this is near and dear to your research, my guy. So I'm excited to get your input. Is that teachers are asking, how can I be healthy and keep doing this work? How can I take care of myself? How can I balance my workload? How can I stay teaching? Because it's getting harder and harder for me to do so.
Man, I don't know, but we'll have a lot more when we get back. Busted pencils. We're back. Busted pencils. Tim, Johnny, Jacob, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education, talking teachers' concerns. Did a nice kind of history lesson, for the longest time. If you're just joining us, the number one concern of particularly future and new teachers, Johnny said maybe, some of the real tested veterans, not so much, but some form of what we call classroom management, keeping things organized so that the flow works out so that when it comes time for me to teach my lesson on the Boston Tea Party, I can really teach well and not have to worry about, who's over there, where they're doing. So, and that's a big issue. And you say, sometimes it's like, well, that sounds really trivial. But, when it comes to really digging deep into a real teaching context, those are things that and you say, and we know there are veterans out there who've got this down and they know that it is absolutely important to really great, effective instruction. But here now, Johnny, you're saying, all this time you're out there spending time with, future teachers, new teachers, current teachers, always hearing what it is. It's like this year, though, holy crap, the concern for classroom management, it's still a concern. Just going to put
Mm.
that out there, but that it's been eclipsed.
Yeah, it's been passed up by the two topics we dropped last segment, right?
Yeah, and I think about this too, and the one is back to you had said number one, what do I teach? The political climate, and this just reminds me so much of the conversations we've had with Randy Weingarten and how she's they're just absolutely saying like stop making classrooms a battleground, and that's what she's talking about there.
Yeah.
And then Johnny, we just snuck this in right before the break and as you were saying during the break, I mean, this is all related, but then teachers being concerned of how do I keep myself well? How do I take
Yeah.
care of myself in this moment? Because man, and you said, close to my research, and I'd say, yeah, and this is pre-pandemic, and I'll just put this out, I interviewed well over 400 teachers across the country about their kind of conception and they're definitely rank, but they were overwhelmingly acknowledging that, particularly at that moment, and this is pre-COVID, that their mental health was seriously in jeopardy, and that they knew that, and they were concerned about being able to keep going if something didn't happen. That was that research was completed in like 2019. So
Yeah.
knowing that, and now Johnny, you're saying, "Hey, Tim, it's up there now in the top 2."
Yeah, and I'll talk about it a little bit more specifically, and we can get back into that number one topic of like how can we teach what we know to be the information that as best information for our students given this political polarization. Jacobs brought up like we are having this conversation in the midst of a culture war,
Mhm.
and we have this real polarization around like what ought to be the future of this country. And Randy Weingarten, I think, states this well. Our classrooms should not be a battleground for that. And then it
Mhm.
has become a battleground. So that's that number one thing we can come back to because it is related to the other two things. But the second one I dropped at the end of the last segment, that's close to your research around, hey, forever there's been all these headlines out there saying new teacher shortage. And Tim, you were saying so eloquently over the years, like, hey, I have research that it's not a shortage, it's an exodus.
Yeah.
We can't we have a real problem with retaining teachers in this country because it's physically and emotionally disastrous to stay teaching. It
Right.
has actual health implications and all kinds of things. So the kinds of things that teachers are talking about, I think the reason why the topic has moved to the forefront is one, the pandemic. I mean, that's brought to the attention of all of the teachers, like, how can I keep doing this? Because it's gotten harder to be a teacher. And it was already a
Mhm.
difficult job. It's gotten
Right.
harder. And the awareness of one's health is pretty paramount. Like you can't do this job sick. And it's been, I mean, we've been a country who's experienced, I mean, the world experienced a global
Right.
pandemic, but I'd still say we're in that era where there's just so much illness
There's so
that's
much illness.
rocking communities. So that's one. The other is the other aspect of that is I mean, this came up quite a bit, and this is also not new, but it's like enough already, is that as a teacher, we want our students to feel safe. And
Mhm.
we also want to feel safe at work. And we can't skirt around the issue that not a week goes by
Ugh,
where somewhere in our country there's a school shooting.
gun
I mean,
violence.
this is so teachers are speaking specifically around like increased anxiety around
Mhm.
if those shootings have been close, and all of them in some form are tangent to us. I mean, a classroom is a classroom is a classroom,
Mhm.
and so whether that's happened, 3 hours away or 3 minutes away, it's been, it's been anxiety inducing to say the least. It probably, and I know this for a fact, I can say, it's created for people, a set of traumas. And
Mm.
so there is a dialogue going on around like, how are we going to keep doing this job? Like, what, like almost a reckoning. Is it really, can I keep doing this? Am I okay? So on one hand, I'm excited that teachers are acknowledging it, but I
I
feel a deep, heavy, almost sorrow. It's a call to action to say, like, I think you felt this when you were talking to teachers about their exodus. Like, come on, what can we do?
what I was gonna say that too, and again, you're reminding me too of, good friends, partners of the show, Teacher Joanna, Teacher
Yeah,
Hallie, Educators Amplified, just always telling her, it's like, "Look, teachers are not well," you know, and what they need to do, and Johnny, though, I wanna see if I can bring this where you were talking a little bit after the break, and is that concern for wellness too, and teacher and Joanna, there are things out there and teachers are trying, or at least were, mindfulness meditations and things like that, yoga, and they're trying to do that. But you even pointed out, and I get this, that even the potential of, let's just use mindfulness, right, to come into it's not safe potentially in a culture war setting to talk about doing something like that because of some form of a connotation potentially that, oh, my teacher is into mindfulness and therefore they must be doing some kind of religious thing that goes against. And so then you think about it, it's like, wait, so teachers can't even practice wellness in the open. And you're like, okay, that in and of itself creates another level of unhealthy anxiety because now I'm trying to keep myself well. I'm doing the things, and now, boy, I need to be concerned about how that is perceived. And Johnny, I'm really glad you brought that up though, too, about the whole idea of like, teachers do now, and I hear this regularly, and this is put into the wellness, spend a lot of their time thinking about school shootings in ways that never could have happened because it now feels really real. And like you talked about this, and we know the show comes out of Wisconsin. And in fact, Madison, Wisconsin, on the map this year with the
Yeah.
school shooting. And at that time, I said, this is how we know school shootings really are when people go, oh, it's an overblown worry, it's an overblown concern. It's now like 1 in 3 people have some connection to a family or somebody who has been in a school shooting now. And so
Yeah.
that brings it home. It used to be, it's like, oh, that happened way over there. But I remember at Parkland when Parkland happened, and I was looking at this and going like, oh my God, a really close friend of mine, that's her child is there. And in fact, she got on Facebook. There's that direct connection. And then the Madison shooting, I was there for 9 years working in the Madison area. So the realities, people are like, well, these teachers are just worried. No, they're not just worried. Teacher Hallie and teacher Joanna, they're not well, and we need to spend time helping them get well. So, Johnny, when you tell me that, the political climate and the concern for their wellness have really surpassed the this idea of management, I'm not surprised at all because I'll go back to that research I did way
Yeah.
before the pandemic. They were saying it then.
Yeah. And to see the way that these three topics, if we were to kind of group them that way, kind of work in connection with one another, right? If I'm a teacher and I'm always going to have this sort of tension, because we can say over decades it's been there, and you know, we we could say like, hey, if I'm really thinking about how do I engage my students rather than have them in a form of compliance, how am I, framing my classroom, to be a space? Well, we know this. If you're well, educators amplified come on and talk about this, and it's brilliant. If you're regulated, if you're healthy, if you're calm, if you're, prepared
Mhm.
and supported, and you're well, you have a fighting chance of helping model that for your students, especially if you're able to structure a system that helps keep your classroom engaging and regulated. And I don't mean regulated with a big set of rules. I mean like our nervous system's regulated so that children, and I'll kind of even say like young adults, our adolescent learners as well, can get into a groove of like, whew, I'm in this space. Like I'm
Mhm.
present, I'm calm. I can identify what my needs are, and I can have those needs met and figure out how to be a learner in this space, how to be amongst others in the classroom. That's all stuff that if we're able to do that, well, we have to feel comfortable in our ways of doing that. And so, if my classroom's been made a battleground,
Mm.
that's already working against that possibility politically, right? If I can't quite teach the way or what I want to teach, or I'm not able to be well because not only the structure of the school, but also, the politics around that. You just gave the perfect example. Let's say for me, it's like I have to, make sure I drink plenty of water. This has historically been, medical practitioners will not joke about this, but they'll say like they'll talk about, oh, teachers have these particular medical ailments
Right.
because of their lack of access to water and bathrooms and things like that. And so, they talk about teacher bladders or teacher kidneys and things
Oh,
like this. And so, if we have like a flippant label for ailments that teachers are going through, I mean, it should be telling us something that the work conditions for teachers are not healthy. And if they're not healthy, it sort of stacks the deck against these other things. So I hate to be excited about this because it's a sad thing, but I am glad that it's on the minds of so many teachers. Like it is ever apparent to them that their job is becoming harder and harder to do in these current times. And that's not me just, saying this is why school is, not going well, because I think that teachers rise up and make it
Mhm.
work, but at what cost? And that they're aware of that cost. In the past couple of years, Tim, we've seen retired teachers called back to the classroom and
Right.
collectively saying, no, we want to help, but the only way we're going to help is tough love, is not filling in these gaps and covering these
Right.
shortages, because if we continue to keep it this way, nothing will change.
Right.
And they have the big 10,000-foot view as veteran teachers, our best of our best, who retire, who say, I could feasibly come back,
Yeah.
but then it will not change. And what I
Right.
experienced as a teacher is not something I want all these future teachers to have to go through, because I believe our schools can be better. So, I mean, the three really work like together, and that's
Mhm.
kind of how these powerful things happen. So, hopefully, Tim, given that we're identifying these, listeners out there, we can, find solidarity in them, some unity, and make them priorities for school change.
Yeah. That's why you're listening to Busted Pencils. Change. You can make it when you're listening. Hey, in fact, come on back. One more segment, Busted Pencils. I know you're dancing right now. Ah, yeah, it's Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. Dr. Tim Slicker, Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, and of course, Jacob, chairman of the boards. In fact, Jacob, you've now had to sit through essentially a Tim and Johnny lecture.
I've had the
And
privilege of sitting through a Tim and Johnny lecture.
all right, and what are you making of what we're talking about?
I'm making that I'm not going to get into teaching anytime soon until some problems are addressed.
So,
It sounds like a difficult gig.
Johnny,
And I thought
okay.
show management of just two people was difficult. But you're telling me, manage 30 little rugrats like yourselves. That would be tough.
That's okay. I don't know if we've succeeded then, Johnny, because we're concerned. We're putting these out there, but Jacob's right. I mean, when people hear this, it actually works as an advertisement for why not to become a teacher. Um, and that's not our intention here on Busted Pencils. The intention, again, is to bring a focus so that we can talk about this, not to go, here's the reality and boy, you're going to hate it, but to go, this reality must change. And there are ways to change. And there are people out there making lots of efforts. And in fact, we need to spend more time advocating for the things that make teaching and learning a healthy place to be. And John, I want to put this together and say, because if we don't, the health of our democracy is what's in jeopardy, along with the health of teachers, the health of kids, because we need that space, particularly in our public schools, to be a place of safety, a place of health, a place of engagement, a place where people feel free to express themselves, to think openly, because that's what we need in a democracy. And so bringing this back, it's to helpfully say, if you're out there listening to this and say, we're not telling you we don't want you to be a teacher, we're actually saying these are the things that are contributing actually to, and maybe you as a neighbor of a local public school, what can you do to say, I don't like the atmosphere and the conditions and the concerns that I'm hearing teachers are feeling about this, because the reality is if the classrooms in my local community aren't safe, thriving spaces, my community's not going to be a safe, thriving space. And I think here now we're kind of asking people to not put out a warning about don't become a teacher, but put out a call to say, this is the time where we need more teachers to be healthy. And those of you who are out there, we want you to engage in this, because this is the place where, we can really make a difference in the world.
And Johnny, if I could say, just adding on to that, what can you say that for every skittish coward like me who gets turned off by this story will encourage problem solvers and people who want to be part of change and making things better?
Well, I think that's a great segue, Jacob. And Tim, I couldn't have said it better. So great summary there of like what our hopes and purpose is for talking about this is, Jacob. I'd say that it's exciting because people in classrooms, people becoming teachers, people that are teachers, school leaders out there, principals are having these conversations or ought to be having these conversations to be part of the solution, not to just kind of say, well, that's just how it is. That's just
Mm.
what it means to be a teacher. And Jacob, I'd say that's kind of the decision we have to make as leaders in education. And so that's kind of what I say is like come join and be one of those leaders. Be part of the productive change. Don't be part of the sort of age-old culture of say, well, that's just teaching. If you're not, experiencing health problems and stress and all these things, well, then you're not doing good teaching.
If you're
And
not
so,
on your second divorce, my goodness.
yeah, and so it's really transformative. This is a time to think about what is the labor necessary, like Tim, you say, to strengthen democracy through
Yeah.
public education, and what does it mean to have those conditions improve, to be a voice of that, to be able to teach, just focusing on that one word, which is an
Mm,
action verb, right?
mm,
Teach. What
mhm.
does it mean to be a teacher? Well, so that we can teach. So how do we make those conditions more more conducive to teaching? And it spans so much. So keep listening here, at Busted Pencils, because Tim, I think all the topics that we hammer down on are
Mhm,
part of what teachers are concerned about.
mhm,
About why are you constantly saying our students are behind? Why does it
mhm.
feel like no matter what we do, we're hammered in terms of like by the media in terms of not doing enough, not being well prepared, not doing we feel like we need more support. So by and large, I think the positive upswing here is that teachers know this, they're talking about it, and they're correcting folks saying, actually, that isn't what it means to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Let's make this better for everyone. All of us get stronger when teacher working conditions are better. And surprisingly, Tim, the solution isn't more pay. So that
Mm,
we're not talking about this like you often hear people say, like, well, teachers need to realize like this is what their job is. They have this many months up, blah, blah, blah. They can't ask for more money. I mean, pay is related, but
mhm.
it's not the number one concern. So we'll keep digging into this, Tim. Great conversation today.
Yeah,
Awesome Saturday. Let's
yeah.
go.
You know what, though? Hey, it's time for your moment of zen. History can untie our minds, our bodies, our disposition to move, to engage life rather than contemplating it as an outsider. It can do this by widening our view to include the silent voices of the past so that we look behind the silence of the present.
Thanks for listening to Busted Pencils broadcast today. And remember, you can grab great podcasts chocked full of more fully leaded education talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course on the Civic Media website. Hey, don't be late for homeroom on Monday, and make sure you catch next week's class and session on Wednesday. And of course, just like today, you can catch every Busted Pencils broadcast at 3 p.m. Central Time across all the Civic Media Network stations for an hour of your favorite blue collar scholars, Tim and Johnny, and keep busting pencils.